to the No Hair All Heart podcast. I'm your No Hair host, Mookie Spitz, and the one with all the heart today is Rabbi Robert Alper, Bob Alper, and not Rabbi Robert Alper. Is that correct? Is that correct? I want to get this right out of the gate.
Not Rabbi Bob.
Not Rabbi Bob. We will not refer to you as Rabbi Bob. Rabbi Bob is not happening.
All over the place. There's Rabbi Herbie and Rabbi Mindy and Rabbi. Years ago, Alan King did a routine about his son's bar mitzvah, and he did the same routine about his grandson's bar mitzvah. But he said they hired a tutor, and he drove up to the house in his Corvette, gets out in his Bermuda shorts and sneakers, and says, "Hi, I'm Rabbi Chuck." And I heard that, Rabbi Bob. I don't like that.
There's a cringe. What do you do at Starbucks? What do you do? What's on the cup at Starbucks for you?
Starbucks? They ask me my name. I say it's Chanoch Rachmiel. Write that one on the cup.
I had a friend who's a Iraqi refugee. We were hanging out in New York, and his name is Faisal. So his cup came back facial.
Good.
So at least you avoided that.
I do, yeah. And I tell people, call me, first of all, call me Bob. If it's a kid, I like Rabbi Alper. But if it's normal people, it's just Bob.
All right, Bob. And speaking of which, you are a rabbi. You are a stand-up comic. You're an author. You're a speaker. And the first logical question is, how did all those Venn diagrams come together?
Rosh Hashanah morning, I'm conducting services, and this is how I began the sermon. For the last 2 weeks, my wife and son were in Peru on vacation. I stayed home to write sermons and prepare for the high holy days. You're welcome. So, crowd loved it. But the truth is, I start many of my sermons when I was in congregational life, which I did for 50 years. Start most of my sermons with something funny, because it gets people's attention. And there's a tradition in 2,000 years ago, a guy named Rabba in the Talmud, it says he used to start his lessons with a joke. It would relax his students, and then they were ready to take in the important and complex issues that he would raise. So humor's always been part of my rabbinate. And I'm lucky enough to be able to make people laugh. Fast forward to today, and it's kind of flipped. People always ask me, are you still a rabbi? Yes, I'll always be a rabbi. There are all kinds of ways to being a rabbi. You can be congregational life, organizational life, academic life, chaplaincy. And I finally was able to articulate it, because I didn't realize my rabbinate is making people laugh. And it goes right back to Maya Angelou, who says, people forget what you say and they forget what you do. They never forget how you make them feel. And the highest point of my career as a comedian and a rabbi took place after a show when a woman who I knew was dying of cancer walked over to me. She said, for an hour and a half, I forgot I was sick. And to me, I'm the luckiest person in the world that I can do something, that I can touch people's lives, that I can make a woman who's dreadfully ill forget that she was sick for an hour and a half. So that's how I function as a rabbi. And I think it's every bit as meaningful, if not more so, than the other aspects. And I love, conducting services. I love giving sermons. I love doing life cycle events, all parts of the rabbinate. But this is one part that I do day to day, including leaving Switzerland 2 weeks ago. I was in the Swiss airport, going through customs or whatever, and the woman has to look at my driver's license. I didn't look at my passport, and we finished. And then I said, and she's very dour. I said, and I want to show you my driver's license. She said, "Oh, sir, I don't need to look at your driver's license." I said, "No, I really would. I would like to show it to you." She said, "All right." So I took out my driver's license, and this is my driver's license. I don't know if you can see it well.
Be careful about your personal info getting out there.
It has my date of birth. It's But,
Watch
but
out
anyway,
for the numbers there, Bob.
but that, yeah,
I love the image. Mine looks like a hostage or a WWF wrestler in heat, and yours looks zany, right?
so I showed this to her, and she broke character. She smiled, she laughed, she insisted on showing it to the person in the next booth, and then she took out her cell phone and said, "Can I take a picture of this?" And I let her do it. And then she said, when she first saw it, she said, "They let you do that?" And so I turned it over, and this is what I have written on the back.
Nice. You melted the Swiss Alp, and the Swiss in particular are known for their frigidity, if you will, so that you cracked that one well. And the more I think about it, the less it feels like a contradiction between being a rabbi, being a stand-up comic, being a performer, being an empathetic individual, channeling energy, telling stories, warming people up, making people feel better. And laughter is the best medicine, the best therapy, and the best type of spiritual healing.
Yeah, there's it. I feel it's such a wonderful tool in my arsenal of serving people, and I love it too. It's creative, it's intellectual, but it also is very effective. I've used humor everywhere in my car. In funerals, I can give you several examples of humor during a funeral. But it has to be judicious. You can't do a stand-up routine at a funeral. You can't make it a laugh fest. But I'll give you the example. I did a funeral once with a woman who we used to email back and forth. She was in Philadelphia, and I had moved to Vermont in 1990. But we kept in touch, and I would visit her even when she was, especially when she was ill. And then I was doing the funeral, and I began by saying how Gwen and I sent jokes back and forth. The last email I got from her contained a list of curses for Republican Jews, one of which was, "May you make millions of dollars and lose it all in one of Sheldon Adelson's casinos." So I read that, and of course everyone cracked up. And the main thing is they remembered Gwen not as a victim, not as a patient, not as a person very ill and dying. They remembered her in her vitality, making people laugh, which she did all the time. And then, of course, we got serious. The serious part of but that way, it was a wonderful way to help people remember her as she would have liked to have been remembered.
Being judicious is important, and also it's helpful to be Jewish because that kind of cynical humor is foundational to our culture, the
Yeah.
tradition itself. There's this archetype of Jewish humor that we've seen through the ages, featuring many great stand-up comics, your predecessors, rolling all the way into film and stage. You've got all these Jewish humorists. What do you think it is? Why are Jews particularly associated with humor? And there's a certain brand of Jewish humor. It's different. The Seinfelds are very, very different than the Richard Pryors. It's a very different kind of humor, as the Woody Allens of the world.
Right. I think Jews prize intellect. And the reason is when you're kicked out of your town or your country, you can't take your farm with you. You can't take your factory with you. You can take your brain with you. So we tend towards intellectual pursuits because they're portable. Uh, and it's a survival mechanism to look at things with a wry point of view. There's a story. It's an old story, but it's absolutely appropriate to today. This is in a 1950s Israeli joke book about an elderly couple was racing from their apartment to the bomb shelter when the husband turned around and started going back to the apartment. Wife said, "Where are you going?" He said, "To get my dentures." She said, "What do you think they're dropping? Sandwiches?" So, so it's taking a really difficult moment and making light of it, and it's a survival mechanism. So that's how we do it.
Survival, and also just this idea of even cultural compression. When you're in the shtetl, when you've been isolated, that high population density is annoying. And we love our fellow Jews, our fellow humans, but oh my God, can it be a pain in the ass? And nowhere does that come out better than in a lot of Yiddish phrases and humor. Some of my favorite insults on the planet come from great Yiddish phrases like, go take a dump in the ocean. That's one of my favorites because it's existential. It's like there's nothing more meaningless that you can do as a human being than taking a shit in the Pacific. So it's simultaneously saying you are meaningless, your efforts are futile, and get out of my face with it. Go do something pointless because you annoy me.
So I don't speak Yiddish, but I use a line in my routine where I say I did a show in Baltimore one. And a man came up afterwards and said, "Rabbi, your performance was geschmeckte besigli besprochen beherhaben," which I think was a compliment because he used a lot of syllables and used a lot of phlegm.
Yes. And Jews are effervescent. We talk with our hands, we emote. And I heard schmecken in there, which is I think the German Yiddish for the smiling, for the laughing. So you're a schmecker engine, which is
Okay.
probably better than a schmuck. Great,
So
great.
speaking of which, I taught it when I was in my congregation in Buffalo. I taught a course in Judaism at a small college outside of Buffalo, Hamburg, New York, and a lot of my students were policemen on a criminal justice program at the college. And at the end, I would ask people any questions you have, anything about Judaism, no matter what it is, I want to answer it, to get rid of stereotypes, whatever. And a policeman who I knew was going through a divorce, and I knew his lawyer was a member of my congregation. He said, "Yeah, I got a question. My lawyer Adrian, we've become pretty close, but he's always using a word that I think it's like a term of affection, but I don't know what it means. He's always calling me a schmuck." So I had to explain what schmuck meant.
Tell them it's like the jam, schmuckers.
Right?
You're sweet and
Yeah.
flavorful.
Yeah. Actually, what I did was I told him the story about the man who bought a camel. And he lived in Miami, and he always wanted a camel, and a small circus was going out of business. So he bought a camel, and he put it in the parking lot of his apartment house, and he was very happy. But one day, the attendant called and said, "I got some terrible news. Your camel's missing." So I'm like, "God, what do I do?" He said, "Well, you better file a missing camel report." So he calls the police, said, "I want to report a missing camel." "Well, it sounds like you describe it." He said, "Well, it was camel color. Okay. One hump. It had one hump camel. It was a male or female?" He says, "Jad, I don't know." He said, "You don't know?" He said, "No, I don't know." "All right. Did it have a bridle?" "Yeah, it had a red and gold." "Oh, wait a minute. It was a male camel." "Well, wait a minute. How come you suddenly remember there's a male camel?" "Well, because now I recall, as I would ride up and down Collins Avenue, people on the sidewalks would point and say, 'Hey, look at the schmuck on that camel.'"
That is another good one. I'm Hungarian, and I grew up speaking Hungarian. And Hungarians don't say bullshit; they literally say horsecock. Horsecock. So we say lofus, which means horse dick. That's a load of horsecock. And it reminded me of that. And there are even more profane extensions of where that horsecock could or should go. Ratcheting up the insults and the absurdity, but all cultures have that. But the Jewish culture, in particular, is biting in its cynicism and its capacity for self-deprecation. Jews are great at that.
Yeah, right.
Tell us a little bit about your shows. You're on Sirius XM pretty much as a regular on their clean
Yep.
clean comedy. And that says a lot about your style of humor too, which I found very, very funny. It's a little bit acerbic and it's a little bit cynical. It's very Jewish, but you've got your own style. And I don't want to say you're like a Seinfeld with a hug, but it's kind of what it's like. You take everyday instances, especially in families, between parents and their children, between adults in complicated situations, and you really draw out the funny in the everyday. Am I more or less capturing your style?
Absolutely. It's autobiographical. It's every instance I use could be true, but of course most are not. I make them up. But some are things that have actually happened to me, and then I'll add one thing to it to make it even funnier or change the wording around. But first of all, I try to be unique. I'm so tired of hearing even really good comedians say, I just moved to Los Angeles, and here's the difference between Los Angeles and New York, and I broke up with my girlfriend, and I'm living in poverty. I don't care. I just really don't care. So I can talk about things like officiating at weddings and funerals. I can talk about baby naming ceremonies. I can talk about traveling to Israel, traveling to Russia, I talk about my family, my wife, my kids, having a psychotherapist wife.
Yeah, just those two words together send
right.
chills into most men, right? Psychotherapist wife.
Right.
Ooh.
Well, here's how it works out. I say we have complementary careers. I don't criticize the way she does therapy, and she criticizes the way I do comedy.
Of course, whatever is yours is hers, and whatever is hers is hers too. Right. Especially when it comes to criticism.
Yeah. So I use that joke. There's another joke I used to use. I might bring it back, where I say we have complementary careers. I make people laugh, and she helps people cry.
Perfect.
That's more of a written thing. It's not that funny, but it's amusing. But anyway, I'm always putting things in, taking things out, and so therefore I have a whole set of material that makes me unique because I am the only rabbi comedian, doing stand-up comedy, and also my goal, which I think is I don't want to hurt anybody. I don't want anybody to be upset. And the example is back in the 1990s. I was doing a joke where I talked about how every wedding I officiated at, the people would select the song from Fiddler on the Roof for the processional, Sunrise Sunset. And it always amused me to see a 220-pound bride walk down the aisle to Is This the Little Girl I Carried?
No, Bob.
Well, I was doing that joke. I had the approval. I had a manager at the time who was a heavy woman, and she thought it was very funny. And other people, and then I remember doing a show in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and my manager called me. She said, I just had a talk with the chair of the event. She told me a few, and then she asked if I'm going to do the joke about sunrise, sunset. And I said, you don't have to tell me anything more. I know the woman has a weight issue. I know she finds it not as funny as everyone else. And from that day forward, not only did I never do that joke again, but when I transferred my material from a cassette to a CD, I cut it out because I just don't want anybody to walk away feeling in any way upset, because that's what they're going to remember if I do material that upsets them. And I've got so much material that doesn't make people upset. So I want to make people laugh. I don't want to make them cry.
That self-censorship is thoughtful. It's empathetic. It's also interesting because so many comics have been complaining actively about censorship and cancel culture. Many of them are terrified even doing live sets, maybe a little less so now. But only a few years ago, they were terrified of folks with cameras clipping something of their set, putting it up on YouTube, it being taken out of context or misrepresented. And a lot of comics have been canceled for jokes, for just saying things rather
Yeah.
than doing things. So you've managed, I'm assuming, to skirt a lot of that because you're self-selecting your material in a way as to conscientiously not offend.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I did a show on a riverboat a couple weeks ago in Germany, and I looked down. There's, the person who introduced me said, "Please turn off your cell phone." And there's a guy with his cell phone filming me, and I was so tempted. Would you please stop doing that? Then I'm thinking as I'm performing, no, let him film me because everything I'm saying you can find on YouTube. I've got like 70 or 80 YouTubes. It's all out there. My website, which by the way is bobalper.com, BOBALPER.
Links in the description below, and I found you on TikTok too.
Oh, really? So, yeah.
Hopefully it's you or it's someone impersonating you, but you've got something like 21,000 followers on TikTok with,
Oh, really?
with your material. Yeah.
So
yeah.
it's out there. So if he wants to tape it and show it to his friends in Peoria, I don't care. But it was just annoying. But I let him do it and just kept on going. When you're a professional, things like that, you have to overlook it and not let it interfere. Years ago I was doing a Hadassah show in Miami, and I'm starting one of my jokes, and there's a sort of a minor commotion, and it's a woman with a walker walking out, and the door was right next to the stage. So, of course, all eyes are on the woman walking out and not on me. And I knew any joke I was going to do was going to go right down the toilet. And the worst thing is I knew she was going to come back. And she did.
Now, another style of comic might have used that for food, right? But you're staying away from that.
I didn't want to pick on her because I knew, I'm sure the last person in the room who wanted to distract would be a woman who slow walks with a walker and has trouble navigating. She's got enough on her plate, enough sadness on her plate. And if I were to pick on her to make myself look funny or to, I can't, I would never do that.
Chappelle might have leaped on it. And,
Yeah.
If it was a transgendered handicapped person, then maybe even all the more so. But obviously that's a different style of comedy and with different expectations. And at least on the plus side, going back to the guy filming you, going all the way back to Metallica suing Napster, the realization happened that shared content online, even though it's your IP and you're no longer in control of it, is arguably the best advertising that you can get. There'll be hundreds, perhaps thousands of people who've never heard of Bob Alper up there on stage laughing at your jokes and perhaps wanting to pursue and see you.
Yeah.
So that's a good side to all this. And again, if you've filtered out your own content so as not to offend, then what do you got to lose?
Yeah.
Go for it, right?
I can't think of his name. A really good comedian. He was performing, and like a few minutes into the show, 4 blind men are led in to sit in the front row, and he had to stop. So he said, "So how come you're late?" They said, "Well, we were at a bowling tournament, and we're late, and we're sorry we're late." He looks at me and says, "So what's your handicap?" and these guys afterwards thanked him. They said they were mortified that they were ruining, coming in late and all that. And he turned it around so that everyone laughed together. Clever, genius.
That stuff is always funny. I remember that Bugs Bunny cartoon when he's like getting up and sitting down in the middle of an audience. Excuse me, sorry, and his ears are clapping up and down like this. And
Right.
it's just an archetypal meme, and just that idea of interrupting the show can be food for the show itself, depending on how it shakes out.
I don't interact. My show is it's 100, maybe 98% scripted, although it looks like it's not. But I work on every joke, and if I can take 2 syllables out of a 15-second joke, I'm thrilled. But it looks like it's not. But I don't interact with the audience. I have one heckler line, and I've never been heckled. The only time I ever used it was I was in a comedy club doing a guest set, and there was a table where they were talking. So my one heckler line goes like this. I said, "Excuse me, sir, would you mind leading us in the silent prayer?"
Very
So
good. Which is a nice way. That's a Bob Alper way of saying
yeah,
STFU.
right, right,
I was going to actually ask you about that in
yeah,
terms of the ratio of what's improvisational to prepared. It sounds like you're all buttoned up going in there, and
oh,
you're
totally, yeah, and I find, yeah, I've done a lot of shows, with other comedians, and I find some of the younger comedians get up there and they say, I was thinking about what I should say. Well, shut up. Don't tell me you're not prepared. Prepare. We're paying good money to see you. Don't tell me you're just playing around with us. So
yeah.
anyway, that's my. I don't write my jokes out, but I go over and over and over and over, and if I can, get rid of a syllable or two, it's a better joke.
I I think you're in the majority than the minority, and when even younger comics do that, I think it's feigned. It's like I'm giving the impression of just
Yeah,
winging it when they've got the aces in the hole, and they're playing with the audience to create the perception of spontaneity, so
yeah,
that they don't know what's coming, but they're clearly drawing into what's been prepped and re-prepped and frankly tested.
yeah.
So many of the comics do tours in smaller clubs before they hit the big
Sure.
venues to test material.
Yeah,
They'll use it as an experiment to make sure that it's funny, or at least throw it up against the wall to see. Kevin Hart, I think, is a classic example of him just doing a whole tour of small cocktail lounges
mm,
just to test the material out. So
yeah,
I don't think you're alone in that. And I think that even if comics come across as improvisational, they're in your same boat.
yeah,
They've polished these and they know that this stuff works.
yeah.
Otherwise, to your point, we paid great greenbacks to see this guy, and he's what, just kind of winging it.
Well, I guess when I see them say that they're just playing, and then they go down the toilet, that they're probably not.
In that case, yeah, when they crash and
Yeah,
burn, it's like they
yeah,
came in with high hopes and left with their tail between their legs, and they've wasted everyone's time, including their own.
yeah.
So it behooves the talent to not just rely on the perception of innate talent, but do the work. And in terms of the content itself, have you seen changes in how it's received from your audiences, changes in the audience over the years? You've been doing this for a while, and comedy, for the reasons we've just discussed, has been a flashpoint politically and culturally. So our audience is coming in with certain expectations. Have you gotten any pushback, even any anti-Semitism that's sprouted up in your work?
I haven't, but I've changed. I always people say, "Do you write new material for every show?" No, of course we change audiences. That's how we do it. Um, I think now when I do my Israel material, it comes with a little bit of relief because they know it's Israel material, but it's not political. It's very benign. It's very funny stuff. I'll give you one example. I talk about when I was a student in Israel in 1969. We had pay phones, and you had to use tokens. And I had to make a call from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv. I dialed the number, heard a voice say, "Please deposit 8 tokens." I said, "Gee, I only have 7." The voice said, "All right, I take 7." So So they hear Israel, and then they say, "Oh, it's going to be okay," because people are tense, no matter what side of the issue they're on. They're tense. So I still do the same material, but maybe the reaction is a little bit different.
I think it's gotten so radioactive, though, especially among young people. And here's the irony or the paradoxical twist to it, especially among young Jews. So you and I have been around the block a few times. We both cracked our 29th year, I think, recently, and we're part of the Boomer slash Gen X generation. We grew up with Israel being the underdog. Our perception of Israel, Zionism, Jewish identity are strikingly different from younger Jews of today. And they're much more empathetic to the plight of the Palestinians specifically, and they see Israel often as a big bully. And it's at odds with, again, stereotypical, but more or less true, that Jews are synonymous with humanism and equality and the values of the Democrats and the left. And there's a fissure now inside the Democrats, and there's a fissure now, often generationally, between older and younger Jews regarding Israel. And I'm curious about your take, especially being a rabbi and being a comic and being there to create community and empathy and bring everyone together. How do you feel about all this? Because it's so strikingly different from what we're used to, isn't it?
I'm an unabashed Zionist because I understand what Zionism is, which most people don't. The liberation movement of the Jewish people. And the part of me that, I write letters to our representatives. We live in Vermont, and we have Bernie Sanders, who's a virulently self-hating Jew. We have Becca Balint, who's Jewish, who now brings out the I'm a Jewish card when she's playing it, and Peter Welch. And all three of them are using the Jews that Israel committed genocide. And when Becca Balint spoke about a half hour from here at a town meeting, I stood up and asked her a question. And the question was this. I said, you've accused Israel of genocide. During the recent war, Israel was bombing military sites that were built underneath mosques, synagogues, houses, and hospitals. There was a lot of people, tragically, who were killed. You called that genocide. I said, during the end of World War II, the United States and Britain bombed cities in Japan and Germany that were not military targets. They were civilian cities, Nagasaki, Hiroshima, Berlin, Dresden. They bombed those, killing about 1 million people. Was it? And I said, was that also genocide? And her answer was, Israel didn't supply enough food for the children of Gaza. And then I was the only person that whole night who got the microphone back. I said, you've just given me a Pam Bondi answer. I said, I need to know, yes or no, did the Allies commit genocide of which you're accusing Israel when they killed 1 million civilians in civilian targets? And she didn't answer the question. And I've written her several times. I've written Bernie. So they won't answer the question because of what the answer is. And Israel did not commit genocide. What's happened is Qatar and other countries and the billions of dollars put into this propaganda camp have used it to demean Israel and to say, look, we don't have to be sorry about the Holocaust because Israel is just as bad as the Nazis. They're committing genocide, which they're not. There was a genocide that was committed. It was October 7th when the Gazans came in and targeted by the Hamas charter the killing of every single man, woman, and child they get their hands on. That was genocide. But the targeting of terrorists who are hiding in tunnels underneath civilians is not genocide. Anyway, that's my other hat. That's my Zionist hat, my Jewish hat. I don't do it in my comedy routines. And I'm absolutely pro-Palestinian in terms of wanting the best for Palestinians. Have you ever heard of a comedian named Mo Amer?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. He opened for me 50 times. I did 50 shows with Mo called Laugh in Peace.
I was going to ask you about that.
And he stayed in my house. We're friends. We're not in touch now. He's a mega major, and he deserves every minute of it because he's incredibly talented, incredibly funny. But I performed at the Palestine National Theater in East Jerusalem. I was set to perform in Ramallah. I've done shows sponsored by the Muslim Student Association and Hillel together. We've done about 200 or 300 shows in colleges called the Laugh and Peace Tour with the Jewish, Muslim, and Christian comedians. So I'm in it for peace, but I'm not. I won't countenance defamation of Israel, which is what's happening, and they're winning. They're winning that fight, unfortunately.
As I mentioned, I had my Iraqi friend in New York, Faisal, who ended up being facial on the Starbucks cup. So I empathize with that. And I in no means want to get into a political or ideological debate in any capacity. I'm more curious about your take about young Americans, young American Jews, and young Democrats, because to your point, Israel is now the wedge issue. Many of the candidates who just won in New York, just south of you,
Yeah.
won to a large extent based on what would ostensibly be considered an anti-Israeli, anti-Zionist, pro-Palestinian position. And this is really becoming endemic and politically charged. So you, as an entertainer, a rabbi stand-up comic, even though your material is really devoid of ideology and politics, you've expressed your personal opinion, and I appreciate your candor. And I'm not saying that I'm not aligned with much of it, but I'm curious as to your take. On the one hand, you have this humanism and empathy, and on the other, we've got an entire generation of young people who see Israel in very, very different ways than you do.
Well, first of all, I think many of the people who sat in the encampments were useful idiots that wanted to get laid. It's a movement. Oh boy, and I think that's part of it. That's a major part of it. The second thing is, I don't think people think critically of what the word genocide means. If they can't answer yes or no to that very simple question that I asked about did America and Britain commit genocide also, then they're inconsistent at best and disingenuous at worst. And the third issue is, and this is something I just don't know, I wonder where young Jews vote for the progressives or whatever, are they doing because they're attracted by their position on Israel, or are they doing it because they're attracted by their position on social justice? Whether that's the issue and that the Israel part comes along with them as baggage, I'm not sure. I hope that's the case, but I'm not sure. And plus, another thing is, for a young person, what a great way to give their parents the middle finger by becoming anti-Zionist. What a superb way.
That's a big part of it. What I find frustrating, though, is this binary position. And I don't mean to dwell on the politics or the ideology, because your stance comes across, as I framed it pretty much, as the boomer Gen Xer knowing Israel under different terms, in opposition to these younger Democrats even, and Jews. And this feeling that everything Israel does is justified, that Israel's strategy and even its tactics, both culturally and militarily, are completely justified from an existential perspective. So my point of frustration is twofold. I find that the younger group, which I call the liberal apologists, they're apologizing for the excesses of Islamists, ostensibly terrorists, in the name of humanism and as an anti-Zionist, anti-Israeli bent. But you also have the militant Zionist who seems to absolve Israel's ostensibly right-wing government, Netanyahu in particular, and the tactics of the IDF as completely carte blanche. That in the name of Israel's survival, Israel cannot be criticized. And even if its overall strategy of this 100x reprisal, its expansionism, its takeover of the West Bank, is fine. Don't worry about it. Don't complain. Don't criticize Israel, because the survival of Israel is tantamount to the existential survival of the Jewish people. I have trouble with that.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't think that's the reality. I think, you look in Israel, the criticism of the government is rampant and deserved, and because it's a democracy. And I think anyone who says Israel's right all the time is inaccurate, of course. Um, what bothers me is that the criticism of Israel is the only criticism that's launched. But in terms of the slaughter that's going on in the Sudan and in China and so many other everyone else, they get a pass. They get a pass. But Israel is to be vilified and to be criticized and to be mocked and to be uh, everyone else is. Uh, I saw there's so much on Facebook, but I saw one thing. It said there are 3 billion people in the United States. There are 15 million Jews, and you're saying the Jews is why the Jews are the reason your life sucks.
That's the elders of Zion paradox, right? That the Jews are lazy and incompetent and horrible people, and yet they control the whole world.
Yeah, right.
And to your point, there's all of these 15 million Jews. You've got 350 million people. Even the budget of the State Department, we spend $3-4 billion on Israel aid, and how much is one B-2 bomber?
Yeah.
So again, it's everything is crazy. I think both sides are kind of nuts in this, and it's just very very frustrating being an American Jew, especially a slightly older one, trying to figure all this mess out. And you, as a public figure, being ostensibly identified as the Jewish comic, the rabbi stand-up, you're doing a pretty good job of staying out of the crosshairs, is I think ultimately what I'm getting at here is I appreciate your candor. And I think this is a wonderful conversation and very illuminating to me personally, and I'm sure our viewers and listeners. But you're getting over that hump. You're avoiding these landmines of controversy and being successful while doing it. So, hats off to you.
Hope so. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I want to make people laugh. Give some relief, comic relief. But anyway, so there's all kinds of stuff.
And you've got books too.
I've got 2.
Thanks, I needed that, with a bunch of nice vignettes and warm stories. And then you've got Life, That's As Good As It Gets. Is that
Life doesn't get any better than this.
Life doesn't get any better than this. These are great. Do you want to tell our listeners, viewers, a little bit about your books too,
Sure.
and how your books relate to your humor and your stand-up?
But the stories, I tell people if they want to know what the books are like, think Garrison Keillor or The Wonder Years. I don't know if people remember The Wonder Years, the narrator of The Wonder Stories of Life. Each story is maybe 5 or 6 pages. They're brief. They're real stories, real things that happen, and they end with a kick that sometimes will make people laugh. And most of them, they're not humor stories. They're very, very poignant. I tell one story, for example, about going through life cycle events and about a bar mitzvah that I can look down and see it from a distance, where it was a typical bar mitzvah. Afterwards at the reception, the boys ran through the building, the synagogue, and the girls taller than the boys were appropriately disgusted, and the kid received congratulations and all. But there was a haunting absence at that bar mitzvah, because the bar mitzvah boy's sister, who was 15 and a half, was not there. She wasn't there wearing stockings and lipstick as the kids did back then. At that time, she was in a psychiatric hospital and pregnant at age 15. And I ended the story by saying, and I often wondered, how could the parents of that bar mitzvah boy go through that day and smile and laugh and be proud of their son with what they were enduring. And the story ends, I never asked them, although I had many opportunities. They were my parents.
Very sweet.
And so it brings people through an event in my life, and to think about how people endure really difficult times. That's one story. There are 75 stories between the two books. There's the story that gets the most attention of all the ones I wrote is called A Woman Named Elizabeth Batt, B-A-D-T. And this is a story, I'm going to make it quick. In Philadelphia, when I was living there, the funeral homes would call me often to do funerals for people who were not affiliated with the synagogue. And they called me to do this one. I said, fine. How can I contact the family? They said, there is no family. I said, well, can I talk to the person who's arranging? There is no one. And it turns out she was housebound for probably 5 or 6 years. The funeral director came to her house to make the arrangements. She picked out her coffin, flowers, grave, everything was set. The announcement that was to be in the paper. And then they said, just come. So I went there to do the funeral, and nobody came. Nobody. Not a single person. So I read some prayers quickly. The funeral director was sitting in the family room looking in, sitting there. He was not the head funeral. He was one of the worker bees. A man in his 50s, kind of heavy set, awkward, a nice guy, but he was the lower level. And we had this funeral procession out to the cemetery with the hearse in my car. When we got there, the workers got the casket and put it on the lowering device. And then they said, when are the other people coming? And we said, there is no one else. And usually, and I think they were instructed to do this, they had to disappear during the interment, walk behind a building, a shed or something, and have a smoke or whatever they did. This time they didn't. They stayed to lend a presence, at a kind of a distance, but they were there. And I felt their presence. And they did the final thing. And then as I walked away from the casket, this funeral director squatted down, which was difficult for him because he's a heavy guy, picked a rose off of the casket, put it to his lips and kissed it and put it back. And that was it. And so many people have commented on that. And I said, no one attended the funeral of Elizabeth Batt, and no one knew of her passing, except for the funeral director and for me, and now you. And that was the end of the story. But the story didn't end. Have you ever heard of the TV producer David Milch? Northern Exposure? Okay. His mother, whose name was Mike Michelle, I think, but Mike Milch, was a member of my congregation in Buffalo. And I returned to Buffalo one time after my book had been published, and I ran into her. And she told me she read that story, that she says Kaddish, the memorial prayer, for Elizabeth Batt every year.
Very sweet. And it highlights how nature doesn't just abhor a vacuum, but human beings, when there's an opportunity for empathy to flow out, will rise to that challenge. So the workers who saw there was no one really in attendance changed their roles and actually connected in ways they likely never did before. It wasn't just a job anymore, but their own significance exponentially rose to fill that gap in ways where Ms. Batt was represented in her final moments, perhaps from an unlikely minion, if you will, but a meaningful one. And it became even more meaningful because it elevated these people to a role they otherwise never would have had and made connections that otherwise never would have been made.
Right. I perceived them in a different way. They were, and there's so many other stories. One of two of my favorite stories, I talk about a woman named Gerda Klein. Is that name ever? It's a Holocaust survivor named Gerda Klein, who died a couple of years ago. And I tell her story, and a story about her grandfather, and an amazing story. She survived a death march. She was one of 4,000 Jewish teenagers who were sent on a death march that began on January 29th, 1945, which was the day on which I was born. And Gerda and I had that in common. We would call each other on that day. She was a member of my congregation in Buffalo in the early 70s. And we maintained our friendship and my adoration for her until she died. And then I flew out to Phoenix and officiated at her funeral. But Gerda told a story about the death march of the 2,000 Jewish girls. 120 survived at the end, some of whom died soon after. But they marched for 3 months. They put them the last day into a barn, a bicycle factory in Czechoslovakia, and they set a timer to explode it. And then it rained, which means the timer was interfered with mud or water, didn't explode. The next morning, only Gerda and one other woman, young woman, were strong enough to walk outside. And Gerda weighed 68 pounds. She was one day shy of her 21st birthday, and her hair turned white. And this Jeep drove up. And instead of an eagle on the door, it had a gold star. And these two soldiers got out, a lieutenant and his driver. And the lieutenant approached Gerda carefully, not knowing what he was saying, and said, "Who are you?" And Gerda, having been trained for all those years to always identify herself, said, "We are Jews, you know," in German. And she said, for the longest time, she didn't know what he was thinking because she couldn't see his eyes behind his aviator sunglasses. And then finally he spoke and he said, "So am I." And then he said to Gerda, "May I see the other ladies?" She said those words, ladies, restored her humanity. And he held the door for her. And as she explains this over and over in her lecture, she said, and he continued to hold the door for me for 50 years, because the next year they were married in Paris. And Gerda went on to write one of the first Holocaust memoirs, published in 1953. And the editors, the publishers, rejected it over and over and over again because a memoir of it's been done. But finally she got a publisher. It's been published, I think, 78 printing, somewhere around there. All kinds of languages. And Gerda went on to become a speaker. She's touched thousands and thousands and thousands of people's lives. I have a picture of her receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom from Obama. And the story of her life was made into a film, and a documentary film. And in 1994, it won the Academy Award for the Best Documentary. And then Gerda's acceptance speech was known as one of the most meaningful acceptance speeches ever made. It's on YouTube. Gerda Klein, YouTube. So one more thing, and I won't keep, but that I love telling about Gerda was I found out just a few years ago, just before she died. Maybe it was after she died. I'm not sure. But anyway, her husband, Kurt, was born in Waldorf, Germany, came to the United States at 17. His sister had gotten to here. He and his sister tried to save their parents, and they finally got visas for them to come to the United States 6 weeks after they had been taken to Auschwitz and murdered. So he was a soul survivor. He became what's called a Richie boy. You know the name Richie boy? The Richie, Fort Ritchie in Maryland?
Oh, yeah.
So he was an interpreter. And the Richie boys would be on the front lines, and they'd capture a German soldier, and instead of beating them or threatening them, they'd sit down and say, "So where are you from?" "I'm from Dusseldorf." "Dusseldorf? I had a cousin from Dusseldorf. He went to such and such a high school." "No, I didn't." "Oh, and how many tanks do you have on the other side of the hill?" And they tell them, and they saved countless lives. So here's what I'm building up to. A few days after Kurt liberated Gerda, he was still in Western Czechoslovakia. The Soviets were moving west, and the place was filled with SS and Wehrmacht and all the Germans who had just surrendered but were very dangerous. Kurt came across an argument, yelling, screaming, an argument between American soldiers and 11 people wearing strange outfits they had never seen before, concentration camp outfits. And they weren't understanding each other. And they were speaking German, and the Americans didn't speak German. The Americans said, because the German, we're going to put them in a POW camp. And the strangers, these 11 people, knew that if they got there, they could be killed by the SS. They were in the camp, by the German soldiers. They were terribly afraid. And also the Russians coming. So Kurt spoke German, found out they were Jewish. And he said, I don't have the authority to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to issue you a pass to the American lines just over the border in Germany, which he did. And the 11, they made it to Switzerland, and they were saved. 40 years later, Kurt received a letter. Dear Mr. Klein, I've been looking for you for 40 years. My wife attended a lecture by a woman named Gerda Klein, who spoke of being liberated in Western Czechoslovakia and mentioned her husband Kurt. I'm sure that you must be the Kurt Klein that saved our lives in such and such a town. I've always tried to find you to thank you. And there's one more thing you should know. All of us were not Jewish. 9 of us had the task and the commitment to take the other 2 to safety. Their names were Emily and Oscar Schindler. So that's the story of, that's not in my book. The story of Gerda is in my book. That's one of the stories, and 74 other stories.
That's absolutely wonderful. And it comes full circle to the essence of your perspective and your contributions, which is sharing empathy, creating community, connecting with people, telling great stories, making people laugh, and in this sense, making them cry, but in a good way, right?
And Gerda, by the way, Gerda had a great sense of humor. You know, I opened with a joke that Gerda told me. I won't do the joke now. And then when
go for it.
Well, I look at the audience. I say, it's great to see your faces. I was backstage. Now I can see your faces. And it's true what they say. They say there are 3 stages in life: youth, adulthood, and you look wonderful. So my audience would skew older. They love that joke. But a few years ago, I got a call from Gerda's son, Jim. He said they were living in Phoenix at the time. Kurt died 10 years earlier. Gerda was 96. She said, I would visit her periodically. He said, Mom is dying. And she had a strange request. She said she would like you to write her eulogy. I said, Jim, that would be the biggest honor in my life. Calls the next day. Mom had it was a strange request. She said, could she read the eulogy? I said, no. I said, I will be there tomorrow. So I got on a plane. I flew out to Phoenix, and she was at home. She had caregivers, and I went into her room, and I have a picture of this. Her son was there. One of her daughters were there. Her son-in-law was there, and the second daughter was there by video. So the whole family, that was the family, just the 5 of us. And I held her hand, and I read her eulogy. We called it an audition. And then in the middle, she became uncomfortable. So I went out of the room. The caregivers came in, and they readjusted her pillows and made her comfortable. And then they said, should we ask Bob to come back in? She said, I'm okay now. Then she said, maybe I'll close my eyes and they'll think I died. And we had a huge laugh. And then I finished the eulogy, and she approved it. And then we had gin and tonics together. And
that's wonderful. And it's, again, very Jewish. It's like the old Jewish grandma scrutinizing your cooking, right?
Yeah.
She's always hovering around the kitchen. It's her kitchen. It's her cooking utensils and her paprika. And then she's got to taste it, make sure that it's okay. And then once she signs off on it, then she's in, right?
Is it? Yeah. I mean, Gerda, she died a week later, and I miss her terribly. But you know, she was the most important part of my life, with the exception of my wife. Her philosophy. She talked about the death march and how they would pass by houses with people sitting in their houses and smoke coming out of the chimney. And that's all she wanted. And in fact, one of the books that she wrote after her autobiography was called A Boring Evening at Home. And she said, that's what to aspire to. That's all she wanted. That's all they wanted, a boring evening at home. And, it colors my life because there's so much I'm grateful for. And I think of Gerda all the time. I think of her philosophy and how precious a boring evening at home is. And I teach that all the time.
My parents were Holocaust survivors too, both Hungarian. And my father, around that same time, December, January 1945, had no shoes. So it's winter, snow, and that's one of his peccadillos. As I grew up, he was very frugal and taciturn, but he had 40 pairs of shoes. He wouldn't even wear them. Just to wake up in the morning and see rows of shoes in his closet gave him the assurance that his feet wouldn't be frostbitten that day.
Yep.
He would literally, I remember this vividly since I was young, he would literally just walk through the American supermarkets. We're accustomed to all the food laid out in front of it. He wouldn't even buy stuff. He would just walk the aisles back and forth, seeing all of this food, having nearly starved to death during all this. So you learn to appreciate. And going back even to the younger Jews now who are entitled, who grew up with not just the silver but a platinum spoon in their mouths, they really don't understand or appreciate or even empathize what it's like to literally be existentially threatened and to have people hate you to the point where they are actively trying to kill you.
Yeah.
And this does exist. It existed then to a horrific effect, and it exists now. And we should never take anything for granted.
Yeah. Gerda tells a story about when they knew they were going to be taken away, and it was summertime. Her father said, "Gerda, wear your ski boots." And she said, "It's summertime, Dad. I'm 15 years old," and she's a teenager. And her father said, "Wear your ski boots," and she did, and that's why she survived the death march, because she had ski boots. I mean, it's the same story. It's amazing. You're telling the story of Dad and his shoes. That's why she survived. She always tells that story. She also tells a story, and each time I would be with her, she'd tell me something that the last time she was with her mother, they were loading Jewish women and girls onto trucks, and they made her mother get in one truck, and they told Gerda to go to another truck, the Jewish policeman. And she said, "No, I want to go with my mother." And she chased after her mother, and she said the policeman grabbed her and literally threw her onto the other truck. And she told me, she said, for years, decades, I hated him because he was the one who tore me away from my mother. And then one day I realized he saved my life. He knew where they were going. He saved my life, and it changed everything.
We could go on with all these stories, and their relevance resonates to this day because it's just the human drama, only exponentially made significant because of the existential import of every moment, every potential decision. And I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be sitting here on this podcast with you.
Absolutely.
A million different events branching back in 1944, 1945, and Hungary didn't play themselves out. It's amazing. We're in a multiverse of possibility and decision and moral accountability at the end of the day.
It's wild. With me, everything reminds me of something funny, or not everything, but I love to. So you mentioned your dad in the supermarket. So Mo Amer, for those who don't know, Palestinian comedian, he says it's wonderful. He says they came here as refugees to Houston. He said the first time my mother was in a supermarket, she got to the checkout, and they said, All right, that'll be $47.20. She looked at the teller and said, I give you 25. I love that story.
Perfect.
That's such a human story. That's such a great
Yeah, I mean,
story.
it's so built in, right? He's 45, maybe go back. And
Like,
maybe we'll get to 32,
yeah,
35 together, right?
I'll give you 25.
That's great. Thank
Anyway,
you for your time,
sure.
Bob
That's my
Bob
pleasure.
Alper. And I'll put all your links below.
Okay,
So you
wonderful.
have your website. So if people want you to perform, you do gigs.
That's what I do. I love doing it.
You'll fly in and give them some Rabbi Robert, not Rabbi Bob. And congratulations on converting a great sense of empathy and sense of humor and all this humanism to a practicing effective career in entertainment. You're bringing a
Thank
lot
you.
of light and life and humor to a lot of people. And I
Thank you.
think that's the gift that keeps on giving. And you did a lot of that for me over the last hour, and I thank you
Good.
for it.
It was my pleasure. You're a wonderful interviewer, and we could go on and on. I'd love to
We
keep
could. I'll
chatting.
bring you back. I'll bring you back in
Okay.
6 months, a year, and we'll see how everything's going.
Okay.
And we'll get some feedback from our listeners and viewers, and we'll tell some jokes. Do you want to part with a good Jewish joke?
A good Jewish joke. I mean, I've got
Or just any
yeah.
joke.
Okay. Here's one. Here's one. Yeah. A rabbi was visiting a retirement community, and he said to one of them, "How old are you, sir?" He said, "Rabbi, I'm 87." She said, "Marvelous. May you live to be 120 like Moses, our teacher." And to a woman, "And how old are you?" She said, "Rabbi, I just turned 97." She said, Wonderful. You should live to be 120 like Moses, our teacher. And to a third man, "And how old are you?" He said, "Rabbi, you may not believe this, but I'm actually 120 years old." She says, "Have a nice day."
Bravo. What the hell else could she say? Thanks, Bob.
Or thank you very much.
Keep
Thanks for
going.
having me.
It's another one. There was another one on the tip of your tongue.
Yeah, well, the young man he's at a funeral. He goes up to the rabbi. He says, "Rabbi, what's the Wi-Fi password for this room?" The rabbi says, "That's how you honor your dead mother?" He says, "Is that all lowercase?"
Nice. I know one. I'll
Okay.
tell this one
Yeah.
too. So you got Moritz. Moritz is in the hospital and he's got all these ailments. And then Rachel, the nurse, comes in and she's got a reputation and she goes, "It's time for your chicken soup." And Moritz goes, "I hate chicken soup. Get that out of my face." So the next day, the same routine. Rachel comes barreling in with the tray. "It's time for your chicken soup, Moritz. I told you, get out of here." So on the third night, Rachel comes in. She goes, "Okay, Moritz, it's time for your enema." On the fourth day, Moritz's wife comes in and she goes, "Moritz, how's it going in the hospital for you?" And Moritz goes, "Well, I'm learning some lessons. You know, if they offer you the chicken soup, take it the first time."
Cute.
I thought I would end with that.
Okay. That's a good ending. Good ending.
And I'm not the consummate stand-up like you. Please forgive me, viewers and listeners, but I thought that would be a fun one to toss
well
out.
told. Good joke.
Thank you so much, Bob. Take care. We'll catch up soon.
Thank you.
And once again, like, comment, share, everyone, and hire the Bob. Do you do bar mitzvahs? You do weddings?
No. I weddings, as long as you're my grandniece, I'll do a wedding.
That's the best. No bar mitzvahs for the Reb. That's great. That's a great way to cap it.